Well, good afternoon and welcome. Welcome to another Webinar Wednesday hosted by Cal State Bakersfield Small Business Development Center. Good afternoon. Happy New Year. No, it's the 10th of January, but Happy New Year. Looking forward to a great new year with Webinar Wednesday and assisting small businesses throughout our current annual Mono County, throughout the Central California region of the SBDC network. So let's get going. My name is Kelly Bearden, and I'm your host today for Webinar Wednesday number 304. Our special guest today, Dr. Mark Evans, talking about economy, a lot of other things coming up. So let's get rolling. And so what is up today, January 10th, 2024? Well, we're going to be talking the economy. The economy's been it's been a huge issue for quite a while, and will continue to do so. So will the economy in 2024 reflect the 2023 economy? Dr. Mark Evans will help us get to that point. A lot going on since we last saw you at the end of last year with the retention tax credit, also known as the employee retention tax credit or the employee retention credit. So a lot of things going on there, modifications, an amnesty plan, a lot of controversy swirling around this program that we have talked about here on Webinar Wednesday since 2020. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that, a lot more about that today. Well, just real quickly, we're starting to see some of the replications come out from the PPP. The Paycheck Protection Program was designed to assist businesses and certain nonprofits in actually weathering the initial stages of the pandemic and keep people employed. And we're starting to see some of the things that have happened with nonprofits. For example, if you're a 501c4, which is generally a membership-based organization, types of organizations that you see with that are going to be, well, they're going to be like property owners associations and things like that. Different from your 501c3, which is the designation for a for-public benefit corporation. For public benefit corporations were able to take PPP. We're finding that now many of those 501c4s, after they were approved by the bank and the SBA, it's been deemed that they are ineligible and needing to repay their PPP loans. So a lot of things happening in that particular realm. And one instance that I'm aware of, what I saw come out of this is that the government sued the nonprofit, the 501c4 that took the PPP 1 and 2 loans, and then basically ended up settling out of court. And the out of court settlement, I believe, was somewhat similar to what you would have seen. It would have cost the nonprofit to defend themselves in court. And so maybe it was a little bit of a better deal from that perspective. But I think we're going to start seeing more of this happening, whereas a lot of the rules weren't as clearly defined during the pandemic and a lot of the things going on. And a lot of those things have shifted and actually jumped to now, include issues that come out after the fact that you weren't eligible to begin with and needs to be either repaid or something else. So we'll have an update today on the Corporate Transparency Act, and within that is the beneficial ownership report that needs to be filed by individuals who are members of an LLC, a shareholder of an S corporation or a C corporation. And so if you're any other entity other than a sole proprietor, you will need to do a beneficial ownership report. So that, talk a little bit about that today. Our community calendar. Yes, we have that brand new community calendar. It's right over here on the wall. And January 2024, a brand new fresh community calendar for the year. We'll get into that. As always, your questions can be answered live at the conclusion of our guest presentation a little later on. So if you have a question, please go to our Q&A box and submit a question. If you have any other type of correspondence, you can utilize our chat box which we will be doing for a lot of our resources today and also part of our poll question. So let's get to that first poll question today. And our initial poll question is going to be kind of a timely group. And what it is it's going to discuss and ask the question, what are your goals for 2024? Any of your goals, a milestone you'd like to set, your key performance indicator, or a New Year's resolution for your business? Is it greater profitability, an improved work-life balance or blend? Is it better cash flow and less stress? Or if it's something that, and it could be a lot of different things other than those three, please go to the chat and you can actually select other and put it into the chat box. So again, our first question, it's the time of resolutions and New Year's and goal setting and all these other fun things that we hope to accomplish in 2024. So is your personal goal, KPI, milestone, or resolution, is it greater profitability, improved work-life balance? Is it better cash flow and less stress, or other? So, giving you a little bit of time, we have 64% of you that have participated in the poll. So we'll give you another moment or two to jump in and throw yours in. If it's another, go to the chat box and complete that, and we'll swoop in and we'll look and see what you got in there. But we're going to end the poll right now with 71% of you participating, and 55% of you are saying, I want better cash flow with less stress. 20% greater profitability. And with greater profitability, we could have included, increase your sales, and et cetera. 15% are looking for that work-life balance or a blend of work and life that is more satisfactory in 2024. And we do have a few of you that are in other, and we will go check that out after our next poll. So there's our first poll question that is done, and let's jump into poll question number 2, and we'll launch it, and it is, what is my economic prediction for 2024 on how it affects my business? So what do you think is going to happen with your business? Are you going to see an improved economic condition for your business, about the same economic condition, or is it going to be worse for 2024? So going off of 2023, which was quite an interesting year that we'll get into, recapping the inflation and a lot of the other economic factors, how do you think your business is going to fare in 2024? So again, the choices are improved economic conditions for your business. It's going to be about the same as last year, or it's going to be worse. So 82% of you, thank you so much for participating. Let's jump in that poll and share the results with you. And 58% are looking for an improved economic conditions for your business in 2024. It's been a while since we've seen a nice, optimistic, positive response like that. Yes, 58% improved conditions. 33% of you thought about the same. So that's roughly 90% of you, the same or better for 2024, and 8% of you are saying, no, it's going to be worse for my business. But overall, a very, very optimistic report. And we'll get to our third in a series of New Year's type poll questions for your business. So, and this one is going to reflect on one of the changes that we'll talk about in specifically next week, and that is going to be the higher minimum wage in California. So in 2024, do you see increased staffing levels? Do you see maintaining or decreasing? A lot of businesses really like to grow, but a lot of businesses aren't now subjected to a $16 per hour minimum wage in a lot of the states across the US. In California, we are, and a lot of our small businesses. So with a higher minimum wage coming in 2024, do you hope to increase, maintain, or do you see yourself decreasing staff levels? Again, getting great participation, 72% of you are in. What we're going to do is go ahead and end our final poll question of the 3 today. We're going to end this particular poll and share the results And there you go. 41% are going to maintain your current staffing levels that you're at right now. 32% are looking to increase staffing levels. It was a tough hiring year in 2023, and a lot of small businesses weren't able to hire people than they wanted to. So maybe that's partly indicative of that 32% increase in staffing levels, while 27% are saying, I'm going to need to decrease staffing levels. Okay, thank you so much for participating. Had a fantastic response to that first poll series of polls of the year. So thank you so much. So moving right along, just looking at some of the key programs, it's interesting to note that the City of Bakersfield Entrepreneurship Program that we talked a lot about in 2023 remains open. So that is the program, the City of Bakersfield's Entrepreneurship Grant Program, that is open to businesses inside the city limits of the City of Bakersfield. And in eligibility, there are several issues, and some of those are you must reside in a qualified census tract, or you have to meet other low to moderate income timetables. So one of them would be, generally the areas that we're seeing a lot of the central part of the city limits, some of the south, some of the east, and some of the southeast sections that are mostly in those qualified census tracts. So businesses in there can apply for a $5, $10, $25, or $40,000 loan, or excuse me, grant. And so the grant program is still open. There are still monies available, and there are monies that the grant program remains to facilitate. We have been working with our partners at CSUB through EGO, which is Extended Education Global Outreach, and have a food and beverage training program. Our other partners in the program are the BC Launchpad and the Kern County Black Chamber of Commerce. Reach out to any three of us if you're interested in reaching a particular goal and seeing if you can seize on some of that money that is still available. Well, we're going to talk a little bit, or actually a lot, about the employee retention credit. It potentially paused back in September after about $230 billion had been spent in this particular program. Late last year, they came out with an amnesty program that's available, and we're going to provide the details for that. So if you think you might have had an issue with qualifying that, the IRS is snapping back, the old proverbial gym room towel, that towel that pops, that is actually coming out in this program now. And if there are eligibility issues that you're concerned with, we talked about one already with the PPP and nonprofits, to where they thought that they were eligible when they applied and then found out afterwards that they weren't. So if that happened to you with the ERC, then there's an amnesty program. All of our storm damage programs, physical damage, economic injury disaster loan, some of the remediation programs are all now closed and have been wrapped up as the beginning part of this year. And we're anticipating a great deal more of loan volume in the state's Small Business Credit Initiative program, and a lot of the programs that are coming out of that, along with our certified development financial institutions here in Kern County and beyond. So those are a status of the few programs and the programs that are still going on. So let's just recap what's going on with the ERC, which is the Employee Retention Credit. Oftentimes we've referred to it as the Employee Retention Tax Credit, because that is very simply what it is it's a tax credit program. And traditionally, tax credit programs are programs that offset taxable liability. Well, this one was a little bit different, to where it allowed a refundable portion of that immediately. So this program was created in 2020, and, it was to encourage employers to keep their jobs. We had problems early on with the pandemic, and the pandemic, ironically, our concern was the ability of employees to stay on the job and be able to pay them. And that transitioned during the pandemic to another issue of, a lot of quitting and people later on, looking at their opportunities and switching jobs and changing jobs and things like that. So, whereas the credit initially was to keep these people with their employers, and initially the credit did expire on September 30th. It was later modified to include parts of the 2021 year. But really, what the problem with this particular program is a provision in the tax credit that requires those that actually utilize the tax credit to go back and actually they need to amend their tax returns, because any amount that you receive for the tax credit needs to be offset against your deduction for employees. So the employee credit is great and it offsets that, but what it does is it requires you to go back and file amended tax returns, and not only tax returns that are payroll tax based, but also tax returns that are your income tax. So if you filed say a corporation form, an 1120 form, you needed to go back and reduce the amount of your deduction for employees on that tax return for the amount of the credit that you received. So that has created a lot of hardship. Early on in this program at the SBDC, we met with a few clients, and then it was like you really needed to be, and I think through the 3+ years of us advocating for this program and advocating its use, we strongly encouraged people to go to their accountants, their CPAs, and others. A lot of marketing firms got involved in trying to get the word out to people, and it just created more problems. And so, recently in an editorial in the Wall Street Journal, the Wall Street Journal labeled this program as the biggest COVID scam, and claims now that the 230 billion had been paid out. So claims of 230 billion and possibly rising to as much as $255 billion. And this was a program that was initially scheduled to cost $55 billion. So it is almost 5 times bigger than its original size had anticipated. And so much of this was coming a couple of years after the program. There was $120 billion that was applied for in 2023 alone, which was at least a year and up to 2 years longer or past those wages that had been paid and the employee retention efforts made. So what happened was in late December, the IRS came out and said, many employers who received the credit can participate in a limited amnesty repayment program. So this does not help you if you have any criminal investigations going on with the ERC and taking the ERC funds. But it does help as far as penalties, and it is a fairly, I think, generous offer for those that think that they might need to repay these funds. And it is going to be for a limited time. So it is something that really needs to be acted on by those who might have received the credit and might be having second thoughts. If you took our advice and you talked to your accountant, you're going back to your accountant now to get your 2023 income taxes done. It's a great time to have this conversation with your financial person. So again, you can return up to 80%. So let's say in my example here, my verbal example, that you have a $100,000 credit that you received, you can return 80% of that, $80,000, and escape most of the scrutiny from the IRS. So in doing that, people were able to claim a credit up to $26,000 per worker. So, but the IRS has now stated that they have they've started thousands of audits and hundreds of criminal prosecutions, and it's offering the employers a way to avoid the civil penalties that could accrue in this particular issue. So with that, you were provided the tax credit. Many took that as being refundable immediately and took the credit, and not as a credit against future taxes. So how the amnesty program is going to work is that The repayment is, again, it's a limited time offer for the ERC for enforcement of this particular program. So the IRS officials became alarmed when this mini industry surfaced to help employers not only claim but file the process, oftentimes for 20%. Those long-term, and many of you that were on the webinar last year, you might have got a chuckle, I know I did, out of the emails that I would share from these ERC companies, thinking that the Cal State Bakersfield Small Business Development Center was really Cal State Bakersfield, was a university. Universities don't pay income tax. Universities have no use applying for or actually receiving a tax credit when you do not pay taxes. You know, some similar could be said with nonprofits. So, you know, I had a little bit of fun going back and forth with the emails that I was showing, but it did. A mini industry popped up. You've seen a lot of commercials on the radio. You might have been cold called. And the IRS realizes that that might have influenced your decision in thinking that you were eligible, and might have confused the eligibility criteria, or you just simply didn't know. They're alleging that, you know, everybody's case is different, and the IRS could end up in court with numerous employees discussing whether they apply for the credit and qualify or not. The IRS also said when the program was paused in September of 2023 that over $100 million was actually redacted from employers who withdrew claims and actually said, gee, I don't know if I'm really eligible for this. I don't really want to deal with this, and to move on. So what you need to do is, if you think, you know, Amnesty might be a resource for you to qualify, you know, 80% for the 80%, you must not be under criminal investigation or be going under a tax audit at this time. And you have until March 22nd. The IRS Commissioner Werfel has mentioned that the IRS doesn't estimate how many employers are eligible for the repayment program. So you won't have to repay any interest for the civil penalties. And again, you aren't having to pay back the 20%. And the reason is you don't have to pay back the 20% is the IRS estimates that most people, or many people, paid a 20% premium to a third party in order to actually receive those funds. Okay, so it is really a mess. It has turned into the mess that unfortunately we kind of anticipated it might here. And hopefully most of you or all of you went through your CPA, your financial professional, your enrolled agent, whoever does your taxes, and got really good, competent assistance on that particular aspect. So March 22nd is the date to remember there. So we have been talking about the Corporate Transparency Act, and as it continues to evolve, hopefully it doesn't become this next can of worms for us. And so we now throw out the CTA acronym for Corporate Transparency Act. We also have the BOI, which is actually the report that you need to file. And so when you see the acronym BOI, remember that is going to be an acronym for the report that you file online in California or anywhere throughout the United States, if your business is located anywhere throughout the United States. So if you do file in California, you still will need to file through this database. We'll be talking more about it, but you know, just to start 2024, here's the top 10 questions that have popped up, courtesy and edited by Jay Thompson, who gave a really nice report on this program on our last webinar in late December. So the first question, the top 10 questions, you know, will the report be necessary if you own a single residential property within an LLC? And that is yes at this time. Do I need to file 10 BOI reports for ownerships if I have 10 separate LLCs? Again, you see that that is yes. You know, the next one was, can certified accountants, enrolled agents, non-lawyers, and others, can they file for you? And this is even something we're looking at the SBDC. If we can assist clients in doing this once more of the rules are understood, and we don't clearly know at this point, because there is a provision in here that potentially anybody who assists you in filing your report could be subjected to the same penalties that the entity is. And that is something where a lot of people are going to look at potential liability going into it, and it still cannot be answered or has been a little bit unclear at this time. So, are registered agents accountable for any of the report submissions? At this time, we see no. Self-employed individuals obligated. So if you file a Schedule C on your tax return, you've done nothing to do another entity other than be self-employed. The answer is no, you do not have to file. And you will have to have a street address rather than a P.O. box, a physical location of where your business is located. You will not have to have your Social Security number. Potentially, you will need to list your attorney in the BOI report. That's still unresolved at this time. And so there's the other three questions. I think it's maybe a good time to maybe have me stop my share and maybe do a little bit different and go on to the website that we have been seeing with the beneficial ownership information, or BOI. And so here is actually the website for FinCEN. You see it as fincen.gov/BOI. And really, one of the reasons why I wanted to pull up their website today while talking about this was the fact that, as if you see in red down here, you see that there is an alert that they've posted about FinCEN has been notified of recent fraudulent attempts to solicit individual information from individuals and entities through the Corporate Transparency Act. So the scammers are already onto this one. So they're already starting to say, hey, people are finding out that they're going to need to actually file a beneficial ownership information form. And they're calling now, trying to get detailed information to potentially steal your identity or other ways to scam you and your business. So please be aware of this. You will not do this. You will go in here. This is the link will be in our chat today as far as resources, right to this website for the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, or FinCEN. And they are the ones who are actually requiring the filing. A lot of great information on their particular site. We will be continuing to reference this, but please do not think people are going to be contacting you with information, asking you for information via phone, via phishing email, or by a text. Okay, let's stop that and get back to the presentation. So now that we've gone kind of through a couple big issues here with the amnesty for that, through the Corporate Transparency Act, maybe I'm taking too much time on this stuff. So let me get to Dr. Evans. So here are some of the tools that are available in our tool shed. We have our community calendar coming up, a couple of great events coming up. We have our Economic Outlook Conference, and that is with Ridgecrest Chamber of Commerce coming up on, I believe, on the 23rd of February, but 22nd of February, I stand corrected. So great Outlook Conference that's available. There's a fantastic event for companies that want to participate in AngelCom. And AngelCom is an annual event where startups actually pitch for up to and over $100,000 in an equity funding arrangement. So they have application requirements that are due in just a couple of days. But if you're looking for funding, you have an innovative startup and really are looking for some form of investment, this is a great opportunity, and in just a couple of days to get your hat in the ring in order to participate in this later on in the spring. So you have to have completed a proof of concept. You need a minimum viable project and or early revenue that's coming on. You have to have the potential to scale and for high growth. Have a team with the ability to execute in place and be located within Central California. So last year, 19 startups, 21 investors, 140,000 in funding, and numerous events. I have another cohort coming up for those that want to start or run a home daycare business. So the 12-week, $1,000 potentially or more in grants. You can call that number and learn from a coach on how to successfully run a daycare business from your particular home. There's our Google. Would love feedback from you today. Our webinars are all pretty much, most of them anyway, on the CSUB YouTube channel. You can go back and see what you have been missing or even catch this one there. Our free human resource hotline that's provided by the California Employees Association with various different phone numbers depending on where you are and where your business is in the state of California. There are the numbers. Take a screenshot of that or grab it out of the chat if you have any questions for our HR consultants, which now brings us to not our HR consultant, but our resident economist on Webinar Wednesday, and that would be Dr. Mark Evans, who is a emeritus professor, California State University, former economics department chair, associate dean of the School of BPA, over 40 years at CSUB, co-founder of an excellent economic piece called the Kern Economic Journal that we really should give more love to on Webinar Wednesday and will in 2024, a recent inductee into the CSUB Faculty Hall of Fame, my friend and one fantastic economist. Dr. Evans, come in and take it away, please.
Happy New Year, everyone. Let me get my screen here. Okay, so what we're going to do today, kind of recall where the economy was at the end of 2022 as we went into 2023, and then what the Fed was trying to do last year and what private professional forecasters were surmising would probably happen, compare the forecast to what actually did happen, and then look at where we are right now, and then what some of the many of the forecasts are saying for 2024. So at the end of 2022, going into 2023, the Fed had already started tightening interest rates in 2022. The slide on the graph on the right, you can see that starting in March of 2022, they started their ascent of federal funds rate, and by the end of 2022, we were already sitting at 4%. But the slide on the left shows that still inflation was running very hot, probably somewhere around 7% or more per year. Okay, so the Fed's game plan going into 2023 was there was a lot of inflation out there. Some of it was supply chain, labor force disruption. The economy was running very hot with a low unemployment rate, so some of it most likely was also demand pressure. And so what the Fed was hoping is that the supply side disruptions would subside, and that would cause some decrease in the inflation rate. But then simultaneously, they thought they would have to slow the economy to reduce inflation further to their 2 to 2.5% target. So their game plan was to sit by and hope that the supply disruptions cleared, which they did for the most part, and then to slowly increase the federal funds rate to whatever level would be required to slow the GDP growth rate, maybe to, let's say, to less than 2% or so, because that would create slow enough job growth to really prevent any demand pressures from building in terms of inflation. So end of 2022, we already had a federal funds rate of 4%. Inflation, depending on the indicator, very high, but slightly different depending on what indicator you wanted to use. Unemployment rate was sitting at 3.5%, very low. Payrolls were running hot. Through 2022, there was an increase in jobs of 285,000 a month, average increase per month. GDP running 2.6%, and then the T-bills and the treasury bonds had already started increasing from what we were used to. Okay, so 2023, what we could see is additional increases in the federal funds rate were required. It started out at about 4% last year and went up to about 5.33% by the end of the year. Okay, so what we have here is I tried to compare what forecasters were predicting to what actually happened. What I used is something called the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia's Survey of Professional Forecasters. The Philadelphia Fed, there's probably slightly less than 40 professional forecasters that participate in this survey. So it's a pretty good number. And what you have on the left is what they were forecasting, median forecast of these 38 or so forecasters for 2023 versus what actually happened, which you see in the right column. So what we can see from the top row is that the 3-month T-bill had to go up much more than they expected. They were forecasting end of year 4.3%. End of year was actually more like 5.4%. Real growth forecast, they were predicting less than 1% a year of real growth, 0.7%. But what we actually got was 2.7%. If there's an asterisk by the number, that means that the final figure for the year is not in yet for that indicator. But it's going to end up being pretty close to what I've got on the chart here. Non-farm payroll growth, again, double what was forecasted. What was forecasted was about 144,000 new jobs per month. What we ended up with was 296,000. Unemployment rate, they expected it to creep up to about 4.2. It did not creep up at all. It stayed in the mid threes, 3.7 at the end of the year. Interestingly, the inflation forecast for the year, we actually came in a little bit lower than the forecast, not off by a lot there. So the major errors were the GDP growth rate, I think, and how high short-term interest rates would go. Last 4 rows are kind of interesting, but they ask forecasters what they think the probability is of negative growth in the 4 quarters of the coming year. And you can see here that there was widespread belief that there was almost a 50% chance of negative growth leading to a recession. And I'm sure all of you recall this, that a year or so ago, I remember one thing that I think I presented on an earlier webinar where one major economist analyzed data and said that the economy we currently had at that point, it typically leads to about a 2/3 probability of a recession. So at the beginning of the year, everybody thought there was a pretty good chance of a recession, and we did get through the year without one. So why did the economy do so well despite the high interest rates? I think there's 2 sectors in particular that really did well. One is consumption, household spending. So if we look at that, there is a huge wealth effect. Okay, the S&P 500 went up almost 20%. For households as a whole, financial assets increased 9.1% from the beginning to the end of the year. Nearly 60% of households own stocks. In many cases, it's just retirement accounts, but still they felt a little bit more secure and in spending. We've read a lot about how first-time buyers cannot afford a house because of the increase in housing inflation as well as interest rates. Really, the dominant effect on the economy is that about 2/3 of households own their home, and their equity went up tremendously over the last couple of years. Fixed rate mortgages are much more prevalent in the United States than they are in other countries. And for the most part, what you had here is 2/3 of the population sitting there with a mortgage locked in at less than 5%. So with that plus the increase in housing prices, as well as the stimulus packages that households had mostly gone through, but not entirely, that all led to really a much larger increase in consumption than forecasters expected. And on the left, what you can see is really the increase in real income was broad-based. If we look at the average hourly, the question is always are your wages keeping up with inflation? And last year they did. Okay, the average hourly wages in real terms adjusted for inflation for all workers increased by 0.8%. And for production and non-supervisory workers that pretty much make up the critical mass of the working middle class and lower middle class, the wage gain was even larger. The other big surprise was manufacturing, fixed investment, and structures. Okay, on the left, what you see is residential construction, which obviously had a rough year given the increase in mortgage rates and interest rates. But what you see on the right is that it was offset to a larger extent than expected because of a huge increase in manufacturing, fixed investment, and structures. This was overwhelmingly tied to just new facilities going in to basically bring the chips industry back into the country. Kind of a whole restructuring where we're going to start producing many of our own computer chips. So where did they go most wrong? Well, the economy was much stronger than forecasted. Forecasters were expecting less than 1% growth. We got 4 times that, 2.7% growth. The job creation was more than twice what was forecasted on a monthly basis. An increase in the unemployment rate was forecasted, and it didn't happen. Unemployment pretty much stayed stable in the 3.5, 3.6% range, 3.7 at the end of the year. And then the other thing that they didn't get quite right is interest rates increased by more than were forecasted. They hit the 10-year T-bond rate, but the federal funds rate went up much more than expected, and the 3-month T-bills increased at a much higher yield than expected. And then the third major surprise, I think, or shortcoming of the forecast, although their inflation forecast was not that bad, it was off by a couple tenths of a percent. Forecasters thought that inflation was going to decrease because of the slackening of the labor market, and there was no slackening of the labor market, and inflation still decreased significantly. And that was a bit of a surprise because forecasters thought it would require really a slackening of the labor market for that inflation forecast to occur. Okay, what did we learn? I think in terms of policy, we've learned or affirmed 2 things. One important thing is, in the many years before the pandemic, what we had is a very low unemployment rate, between 3.5, 3.9% or so. And at the same time, we had stable low inflation. And there was a lot of questions about post-pandemic, would this relationship still hold where we could maintain a very low unemployment rate without accelerating inflation? And it looks like that's the case. The unemployment rate never really creeped up. It was in a range that many considered inflationary, but we did not get the demand side inflation. So fortunately, it looks like this pre-pandemic relationship may still hold. And then I think the second thing we learned in terms of future, how do we adjust to future supply shocks? Even though interest rates went up, what the Fed did is they maintained enough liquidity in the system to keep the economy growing. And even doing that, what happened, the idea that the supply shock should dissipate on their own and inflation should come down, even without going into a recession. We tried to engineer slow growth. We really didn't succeed completely. The growth was much quicker than the Fed thought, yet we still had disinflation. So I think the lesson there is you don't really have to immediately run the economy through a recession to get rid of that supply-induced inflation, that it will work its way through the system on its own. Okay, where are we at the end of 2023, beginning of 2024? This shows two ways of looking at the PCE Core Price Index, which is the Fed's favorite measure. On the left, if you're comparing what happened in a quarter to what happened in the same quarter 1 year ago. And if you're measuring inflation that way, you're getting, 3.8% at the end of 2023, beginning of 2024. And actually, this doesn't include the fourth quarter because the data is not out yet on this particular measure. But if you look at just what was the price increase in the latest quarter of data, then compare that to the previous quarter, calculate a percentage, multiply it by 4, under the assumption that what if to annualize it, there what you get is 2%. So, I mean, so basically what this means is the Fed, they're looking at both of these and they're not sure if they're just pretty much at their target of 2.5% already, or if we're still running, maybe just a little under 4%. So that means they're going to continue leaning on growth. What you have in the middle is what happened in 2023. What you have at the right side is what the median forecast is of these 38 or so forecasters for the year. And you can see they're expecting about a 0.5 point decrease in the 3-month T-bill. They expect the 10-year Treasury bond rate to stay about the same. They expect the GDP growth rate to remain positive, but come in, finally slow down a little bit from what it was last year, maybe 1.7 versus 2.7% from last year. They're expecting this to finally slow the job increases from around 296,000 a year to a more sustainable, or 120,000 or so, which is consistent with a slight downtick in the growth rate. The unemployment rate, forecasters expect it to creep up by about 0.5%. So basically, they're predicting what they thought would happen in 2023 will finally happen in 2024 in terms of the unemployment rate. They expect a continued slight decrease toward the target of inflation. And then, okay, what's their assessment of negative growth possibility? Last year was almost 50%. This year, for this coming year, it's maybe more like a third probability of negative growth at some point during the year. What are the possible outliers? Well, I think the Fed is still leaning against inflation, so we don't know how much they're going to have to continue tightening. At this point, they're thinking they will not have to tighten anymore, and they'll actually be able to decrease the federal funds rate 2 or 3 times next year. We probably have not fully adjusted to the higher interest rates in terms of spending reduction. So again, this would speak to a slightly slower economy. There's always the budget politics problem. I'm a little bit optimistic here that there's not going to be any shutdowns during the year or anything that would disrupt the macroeconomy budgetarily. In terms of the debt trajectory, I think they're just going to ignore it like they always do. And then Middle East and Ukraine, of course, there's possible supply shocks. So with that, I guess what we're expecting is a little bit more of the same as last year.
Fascinating stuff, Doctor. So are you bold enough to come on and make any projections on what you think is going to happen? I noticed you stood behind the Philadelphia board rather easily, but does the good doctor think?
I think that makes sense. Uh, I think there's not going to be a need for further increases in the federal funds rate. And that, probably somewhere around May or so, we'll start seeing that rate go down, a quarter point at a time forecast. The
Yeah.
interesting thing too is how do these forecasters make their forecast? What I noticed last year is at the end of the year, the Fed publishes kind of like targets for the year, or what they think is going to happen. And I think when it's the Fed doing it, it's not so much a forecast as this is what we want to happen, and this is what we're going to try to make happen. And what I've noticed is that the forecasts of the private forecasters don't vary that much from what the Fed's saying. So I think what that's essentially saying is that they're optimistic that the Fed will be able to do what they're trying to do.
So it sounds like we've had that soft landing where last year we were talking about there was an excellent chance of a recession in the next 6 months, and then 6 months would pass and it'd be an excellent chance of a recession. We've had that soft landing. So I think a lot of small businesses are now looking at interest rates on when it's going to be, a little more cheaper to borrow and maybe expand their businesses. So by your federal funds rate, could you forecast a drop in, say, the U.S. prime rate by the end of 2024 of maybe 2%?
I don't think 2%.
Is that too much?
I think it's too much. Just seat of the pants, impulsive thinking here. I think that would be too much, but hopefully by a point,
Okay, well, that is a vast improvement.
3/4 of a point, a point.
Any other projections you'd like to make, Doctor? While we're still recording?
Yeah, I think I'm going to do better than you in fantasy baseball this year.
Well, if I play.
If you play. And I think you should play.
Well, that wasn't the case 2 years ago, Doctor. You didn't do better than me.
No, I didn't.
Okay, so let's get to our questions. And, this is a question that an anonymous attendee has submitted. It says, does Dr. Evans have any ideas on how the economy will be affected by the Dodger acquisition of Shohei Ohtani?
Yeah, I do. I think I think it's going to cost me a lot more to go to a game. I saw one interesting story that said it was from the point of view of they think that the Dodgers are going to make so much money in terms of international marketing in Asia because of Ohtani that it's basically economically it could be as good a deal as it is in terms of outcome on the field. But they were just talking about what a huge market potential there is in Asia that they may be able to capitalize on. I thought that was kind of interesting.
Okay, enough baseball, because next we'll be talking about the Dodgers' hostile takeover of the Japanese empire. So how about the next question we have in here is related to the ERC and the employer retention credit as far as a problem. Is it a factor of bad actor businesses improperly applying these funds, or the ERC giving out these funds without properly vetting the requests? An excellent question, I might add. I would say it's a combination of several factors. There's definitely going to be some bad actors who knew that they weren't applying, and really the worst actors of all those would be those that are doing multiple applications and doing it in a totally fraudulent way. So there's going to definitely be that factor in there. As far as the ERC giving out the funds, that would fall under the IRS. And I believe, if they went through there, I think you also have shared blame with the third-party marketing companies who really marketed this for a very significant fee. and probably didn't always disclose that the individuals need to go back and to amend taxes, and they need to do a lot of other factors that are going to come into play. So I think we could probably reel off about 3, 4, 5, maybe even 6 reasons for the ERC problem. Another thing is it probably should have had a cap and wasn't extended. So I think some of that is going to, I believe, fall back on some of the political forces that created that program and sustained it through 2021. I mean, we're talking about $120 billion that was made this year for a credit that really at the end of 2021 didn't even matter anymore. So a lot of things. Doctor, a question for you. What are your thoughts on the Central Valley Kern County job growth and prospects for local housing market, particularly with these higher mortgage rates and these nagging supply chain issues? So let's cut that off. Let's start with the job growth. Your thoughts, how strong do you see job growth being in the say the San Joaquin Valley, Kern County region?
I think we're going to do well. I, I think there's still some impetus to move from the higher rent areas to the Central Valley. At least down here, it seems like the logistics industry is really taking off. Oil, of course, is going to continue having trouble, although sadly it's booming in the rest of the country. But it's a completely different situation here. But they're just the oil industry is really doing well other places, which is
so housing with high mortgage rates. And mortgage rates really historically, I mean, if you go back over the last decade or 2 decades, they're high for that. But historically, mortgage rates aren't really too far out of the realm, are they?
No, I think historically they're not, but relative to the years we've just come out of, there may be a lot of young families that have sticker shock that they're just not used to what we can remember as being normal. But
Supply and demand.
yeah, it's I think we've got another year where I think the rates will come down a little bit, but not to a level that a young family looking for their first home is going to get excited about.
Yeah, who would have ever thought it would become so costly and so difficult to build a home?
I know.
Okay, well, let's jump into our chat and some of those other to our poll question, more prospects and expanding our reach of service is your goal for this year. So that's good to see. And thanks for the greetings. There's information the Maureen has posted on the employee retention credit. Also, yeah,
I think more prospects came up several times, didn't it?
Yeah, and it did come up a few times. So that is something that's really going on good. If you're interested in participating in AngelCon 2024, that link is there in the home child care business class, business training class, and a little bit of stuff on our YouTube. Anything you'd like to wrap up with, Doctor, as we get out of here?
No, I just think I think there's a reason to be kind of confident and optimistic that we're going to get through the year in pretty good shape.
Okay, I like an optimistic forecast, Doctor. So, so I'm hedging that that's exactly what we just got. So, okay, well, let's wrap this thing up. We'll be back next week, webinar number 305. We'll be talking about a lot of the new changes and law changes related to the state of California, particularly related to HR. Might have an update on a little thing called PAGA, PAGA. Do that next week. So for Dr. Mark Evans, producer of Marine Busher Ding, I'm Kelly Bearden. We'll see you next week, everybody. But you have a great week and a fantastic 2024. Goodbye, everybody.